Summer's officially here, so what better topics to talk about this week than golf and cottages? This week we're going to talk about the LIV Golf and PGA merger or proposed merger, what that looks like, what sports washing is a term that's been tossed around an awful lot around this, why this merger is important not only for sports but just overall. Next, we're going to dive into the cottages. Spend a lot of time with family at cottages is amazing. And when you own that cottage, passing along to the next generation can either be a gift or a burden. Let's make sure it's a gift if that's what you choose to do. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the legend of Maurice Flitcroft. For those of you who've never heard of that name, it's such an interesting story, so I hope you listen to the end. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trevor Miller from Cherry Hill Private Wealth. Enjoy the perspective. When you look at the history of mergers, most mergers actually don't start with lawsuits filed against each other before then ultimately deciding that the companies should not only coexist, but become one entity. This doesn't happen very often, so this is really unique between LIV Golf and the PGA. Disruptions to industries come in many different ways, and it's not uncommon to see a more established entity swoop in and scoop up a newer entity when it feels that it's either threatened, as I think what we're seeing here, or there's a strength and strategical benefit to owning the new company. There have been several large mergers and acquisitions happen in recent memory, with L3Harris acquiring Aerojet and Armagen purchasing Horizon Therapeutics just in December 2022 alone. Recently, north of the border up here, we have Rogers recently acquiring Shaw Communications just a couple months ago. The merger of the PGA and LIV Golf is not dissimilar to this, but it has in different conversations about sports washing, and frankly, it's just a very interesting story given the apparent animosity between the two golf leagues. I think most of us are familiar with the PGA in one way or another, as it's been the maiden golf league since 1929, and if you're a golf fan, it's given you many iconic memories over the years. On the other side, LIV Golf only came onto the scene in 2019, with the first tournament played just over a year ago. Several of the PGA's most recognizable names decided to leave the PGA for LIV as the Saudi-backed startup began throwing millions of guaranteed money at these golfers. Unlike most other professional sports, golfers receive most of their revenue from winning and placing well events, which wouldn't fare very well for the Toronto Maple Leafs and their players over the last number of years in that pay-for-performance kind of venture. LIV has attracted many of its golfers by giving out huge incentives like the $102 million that Phil Mickelson received for making the change. LIV also put together a massive prize fund of $405 million. And to kind of put that into perspective for you, Charles Schwartzel won the LIV tournament, the first LIV tournament back a year ago, and won more in that particular tournament than any year on the PGA, which for him spans over 2 decades. So that's one win versus a full year on the PGA. LIV has also tried to market themselves to the younger crowd. Many of the old school rules around golf has been relaxed or completely just thrown out. There are looser dress codes. There's music on the course now. And yes, there are 160 speakers on course at each event. They've also reduced the rounds from 4 rounds to 3 rounds. And for every tournament, there are no cuts. So every player gets to make money at every tournament, which is a stark contrast to the PGA. As LIV Golf came into existence and started attracting notable players like Phil Mickelson and CEO Greg Norman, the PGA attempted to ostracize these players that decided to make this leap. Fines, suspensions, and bans were passed on to these players. Eventual lawsuits and counter lawsuits between LIV and the PGA came down and were still unresolved when the merger was announced just this past couple weeks here. Both sides have now dismissed the lawsuits under the new agreement, so we're not going to see that go forward at this point. But with still so much in the air, it's difficult not to speculate on what the future of professional golf looks like. What new rules are they going to keep from LIV, and what are they going to scrap? I really hope they've got the music on course. I think that's such a cool way to liven things up a little bit. Currently, it sounds like the proposed deal has the PGA Tour remaining a non-profit organization where they would retain full control over how the tournaments are played. But of note, the board of directors for the new entity would be led by Yasser Al-Ramayan, and I probably screwed that up. My apologies. Who is now the governor of the Public Investment Fund and also oversees LIV. And essentially from there, a number of the board members and executives would be from the PGA, so they would effectively have the majority voting rights, effectively having control over how the PGA or the PGA LIV or whatever they're going to call it continues to work. This is in no way a done deal at this point, and there's still lots of details that have to be sorted out, and this is really being called a framework agreement at this stage. There's not going to be any big changes for 2023, and things will kind of carry on as is on both tours. will remain separate and set schedules as they stand. We're also now seeing a hearing from the Senate committee that could happen within weeks, as Senator Richard Blumenthal argued that this deal could have national security implications. I'm not sure how that can happen with a golf tournament, but they are having this come across the Senate board. And there's also a bill that's been put forth to remove the PGA's exempt status. Many of the players have mixed reactions and are still waiting for information to be passed on, but initial estimates are that up to 90% of players are against the merger. Tom Watson, who many of us know from years gone by, hasn't played in a long time, but still has the respect of many players. And he wrote a pretty scathing letter, open letter to the commissioner recently. So a lot of resentment on this at this point in time. So when it comes to the topic that's been brought up around the merger, sports washing may or may not be taking place here, but it's definitely been something that's been discussed. A lot of the initial controversy around LIV was with its ties to the Saudis and their track record around human rights and terrorist activities, including their part in 9/11. So basically, sports washing is when a nation, typically a nation that has a poor reputation, ties themselves to a popular sports event to try and bring up their reputation. A few of the more recent examples could be the 2018 World Cup held in Russia, the 22 Beijing Winter Olympics, or the Joshua vs. Ruiz boxing match in Saudi Arabia in 2019. Whether LIV Golf is sports washing or the Saudis' attempt to create a program that youth can look up to is still up for debate, but it's definitely brought up this conversation around sports washing. For anybody who has a cottage, having time spent there with family, with loved ones, with friends is one of the greatest experiences. But it also is a really meaningful aspect on the financial side as well as the emotional side. It's emotional to the owners, and it's also really emotional to the heirs and the kids that come and spend time or grew up at the cottage, spent time in the water and at the dock. Trying to keep the cottage in the family is something that many of us want to do. Those memories can be passed on, and now we see the grandkids coming out and spending time there as well. So we want to have those memories passed on through generations. But passing along a cottage is not as simple as turning over the deed, passing along to the next generation, and that's it. There can be huge tax consequences, and there could also be very emotional ties to this inheritance. I'm going to go over some do's and don'ts when passing along the cottage to the next generation. The big thing is make sure you're talking to a financial planner, a tax accountant, and a lawyer to make sure you're getting this right. Also talk to your kids. Don't assume that your kids want it. The cottage is likely been a source of fond memories for everyone involved, but when faced with ownership, it's entirely possible that your kids just don't want it. It's time to sit down, have that conversation with them, make sure they want it. Don't assume. Also, don't assume the kids can keep it up. Cottages aren't free to maintain. Like all property, they occasionally need a new roof, a garage, a furnace. The dock will wear away at some point in time. So while having a cottage is a welcome thought to many people, and we can just picture ourselves spending countless days and nights on the water, the reality of it is it might not be practical. If you have more than one child, passing it on to both of them causes some issues, but also only passing on to one of them could have different issues. Even if you're trying to keep the estate equal, there are different tax consequences to cottage versus primary residence, which there is none if done properly, and versus RSPs or TFSAs or non-registered investments. So you really want to make sure that it's an equalization, not of just what the overall asset value is, but also what those tax consequences could look like as well. When you're passing it on to multiple children, proximity could be a different challenge as well. When you have one child that lives close to the cottage, where one might live in a different province, both might spend time there, but one will spend more time and probably take more of the upkeep on it as well. If you are planning on selling to your kids, don't sell it to them at anything less than fair market value. This could really result in double taxation. When you give your kids a deal on the cottage, the capital gains are still going to be praised at the fair market value. So you really haven't saved anything on that side. And when the kids have purchased the cottage at a lower value, their capital gains will now be increased over time as well. You've likely spent a lot of money on your cottage over time. So whether you're looking to pass this on to the next generation or something you're looking to sell in the future, make sure you're keeping all receipts, as this will pull down the capital gains owing. So have good records. Make sure that you reduce the tax consequences no matter what decision you're looking to make on the cottage going forward. You can also consider gifting the cottage to the kids outright. The downside to this is that you as the gifter would lose control over the property, But if that's something you're looking to do anyways, you've got a good relationship with your kids, and they're not going to tell you not to come to the cottage, this might be a good way to do it. You might also want to take a look at using a promissory note in this transfer, where there could be a repayment plan of it going forward. This will help spread the tax consequences over a longer period of time. Getting a little more complicated now, a personal trust could be something that could work for you depending on how many kids and the size of the estate. This is definitely the most complicated of the solutions, but if for significant control, it makes it easier for the beneficiaries to share a single asset. This is definitely something that you don't want to do on your own. This will take a financial planner, a tax accountant, and a lawyer to make sure that you're getting it right. One of the things I've seen a number of my clients do over time after they've had a conversation about what they want to do with the cottage and what their children would like to do with the cottage is the kids actually buy the life insurance policy on their parents. They pay the premiums on this. When you eventually pass away, the life insurance is enacted. That will help pay for the tax consequences and a lot of the upkeep and different things going forward. And it could be a really effective way to make sure that that cottage stays in the family and leaves that legacy for a long period of time. This is no way an exhaustive list of things that you need to consider when looking at a cottage and passing it on to the next generation, but hopefully it gives you some insight into thinking about having those conversations. And to me, that's the biggest part of this that you should take away is have that conversation with your children, and then from there make sure that you're talking to your professional advisors to make sure that you are making the right decision, that your children can afford it, and it's going to be a gift and not a burden. One of the craziest golf stories has to be the tale of Maurice Flitcroft. Flitcroft was a 46-year-old crane operator from Barrow-in-Furness, England, who decided to enter the 1976 British Open despite never played a full round of golf before. He submitted a fraudulent entry form claiming to be a professional player and was somehow accepted. On the day of competition, Flitcroft carded a score of 121, which is actually a really good score for somebody who's never played a full round of golf before, but this was the worst in the tournament history. His bizarre swing and lack of understanding about the game led officials to disqualify him, but his determination was far from over. Over the following years, Flitcroft kept attempting to qualify for the British Open under a series of aliases from Gerald Hoppy to Gene Paycheck to James Bo Jolly. While Flitcroft never came close to winning or even qualifying, his persistent attempts and underlying love for the game have made him a legend in the golf world. His story is an amusing reminder that passion can sometimes trump expertise. Hopefully you're going to get out this weekend and enjoy some time outside, either on the golf course or at the cottage. You can take some humor in Flitcroft and what he's done. There's still hope for the rest of us to get out and play in the British Open, I guess. Aside from that, have that conversation about the cottage. Watch out for what's going on with the PGA and LIV Golf. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to unfold with that. And until next time, take care.